instruction that it brings. And I just pray that you would open our hearts today that we might receive from you and learn more of your ways and understand more of your character and love towards us. And we're just grateful for what you do for us through your word. Bless this time together, we pray.
Amen. Amen. All right, so we are in Devarim, the Torah portion Shophtim. Two quick asides here to get started. Hopefully you guys remember everything in your 7th grade civics class, because that will come in handy today. 7th grade civics class. And secondly, my mommy took a fall again this morning, and she's in the ER right now. So I'm going to leave my phone on, and I am on the call list if there's a problem. So just a warning, there could be a break in the action, and I will take that break if needed. So another one, yeah, last week and now again this week. They've done a CT scan, and she was apparently quote unquote combative. So usually I would be the one that would be combative, I would think, but maybe I get it from my mom. So but anyway, so I'm kind of awaiting a phone call from the hospital, so we'll see if that shows up. So Devarim, we are in Devarim. It seems, oh, those are all muted. Let me find my notes here. For some reason, they're not open. Shophtim, there we go. And welcome, Rich. I will turn the doorbell down a wee bit here. If it's not loud, though, I may not hear it. So, so the Torah portion starts in Deuteronomy 16:18, if I am correct. Yes. So it says, "Appoint judges and officers within all your gates, which Jehovah your Elohim is giving you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous right rulings." So what word is Shophtim there? Judges. Okay. So shafat is the root word, which means to judge. Okay. So when you get that O sound in there, it turns it into a noun. So then you get Shophtim from shafat. Shophtim. Im is plural, right? So we end up with judges as our Torah portion. So this Torah portion has something to do with judges. Keeping in mind that we are reading Deuteronomy, Devarim, which is an ancient Near East treaty. So we've talked the last few Torah portions that we've been together that we had a preamble in the treaty. All ancient Near East treaties are the same. We had a preamble, then we went through a historical prologue. The third section that all treaties had were ethical stipulations. And so chapter 17 still falls within those ethical stipulations. Okay, so that's our little piece of context there. So let's skip forward now to chapter 17, just a few verses, starting in verse 8. And we'll focus on this section. We may go off the reservation also. I do reserve the right to continue to go off the reservation at will. So, Rich, can you read 8 and 9 for me there?
8 and 9?
Yeah.
If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that Jehovah your Elohim will have chosen and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case,
okay,
it stops mid-sentence.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Okay, so so that magistrate, who's the magistrate? The Shophtim. Okay. So to put this in our language and culture today, what's he describing in those two verses?
Court.
What kind of court? Is this divorce court?
Looks like criminal court. So it's talking about homicide.
Okay, criminal court. Is this the initial court that they go to?
I wouldn't think so. No, it says it was too baffling. So they tried doing something lower first.
Okay, so what do we call those higher courts?
Higher courts.
Could be a Supreme Court, and in our system, we would there's a step in between. We would call them the appellate court, okay, or the Court of Appeals, right? Okay, so if any case arises requiring a decision, or if it's baffling, I love that, between one kind of homicide and another kind of homicide.
That's killing versus murder.
We kind of think, yeah, so manslaughter versus murder, right? That's kind of how we would probably look at that in our case law today. One kind of legal right and another.
Mine says one kind of lawsuit or another.
So it could be a border dispute they can't solve.
Okay, or one kind of assault and another. Like Himalayan sea salt versus, table salt, Morton's, right? So what would be one kind of assault and another? Do we know any laws or commandments about assault?
Well, as you go on, they have the cities of refuge for if someone, like he said in here, if the axe falls off its handle and hits the guy you're working with in the head, he dies, you can run to this city. So that's an assault, I guess.
Okay.
Even though it wasn't unintentional.
Well, in that case, that would be manslaughter.
That'd be manslaughter. Oh, that's true.
So what?
Oh, whacking a woman and she loses her baby.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. And thanks for putting that in our terms. Whacking a pregnant woman. That's correct. Okay. We actually have case law about that. Okay. Okay, so it gives three areas that that can be appealed. Okay, is there any, this would be kind of a fun one because it's so relevant today. Is there really any dispute about what day Sabbath is?
Shouldn't be.
People try to make it today, but biblically there isn't. It's very clear what day it's at. And it's very clear what day when it starts and things like this, right? There are people trying to make issues out of this, but the text is very clear about it. We know how to spot the sliver of the moon now. We know when the feasts are. We know what the feasts are. These things are settled case law. We know we shouldn't be picking up sticks on Shabbat. This has been settled case law. But there are other things that aren't settled yet, okay? And so when those areas show up, then there is a right of appeal, okay? Okay, so then if let's see, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to that place that Jehovah your God will choose. So what place did that end up being? Jerusalem, okay. And what is the grounds or basis for the appeal?
Couldn't get a decision down low.
Yeah.
Why? The judge can't come to a decision. Okay, so are the litigants appealing?
No, actually, the judge kind of is.
The judge is doing the appealing. Okay, the judge goes, I can't solve this. I need to take this to a higher court who has more gravitas, who has more authority, who has more understanding, more wisdom than I do to solve that problem. So litigants don't get to appeal a court case. Hi. It is the judge who appeals the court case. Okay. Is that what happens in the United States court system?
Well, he's not really appealing though, because there's no decision to appeal.
Yeah, so it's not appeal in the way we would look at appeal today. Correct. So and it says, and you shall come to the Levitical priest and go to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. So the judge has went to that higher authority and has asked for them to make the decision because he feels, for whatever reason, he's incapable of making that decision. Right?
During the time of the judges, the Levitical priesthood wasn't really active, was it?
Not that we.
But it says appeal to the Levitical priest.
Well, see that it says Levitical priest or the judge who is in office in those days. So what he's doing is saying, well, there's going to be a system, and then there's going to be another system.
So my assumption here is that, so why would you go to the priest instead of the judge?
Oh, maybe one would be based on
It's all based on
religion, if you will, and the other one based on something civil.
Yeah, so if there's a question about, like, okay, was that tuna fish clean or unclean? Yeah, maybe the priest might have a better answer. Was that leper clean or unclean? Did they meet the standards that needed to be done? Or maybe there's some sort of ritual question that he could get wisdom about, or understanding that he doesn't understand, how this was supposed to be done. Or if it's a right ruling that has to take place, simply because there's no case law that he can go to. So I think that's probably why they're both there.
So how are the judges? How were they chosen? I mean, what kind of qualifications did a judge have to have?
I think that the judges, if I understand correctly, they were appointed.
Why?
Good question. Whoever was an authority in that area, like the tribal chief. So because it didn't. Where did it say this?
Well, it says appoint for yourself, judges.
Wasn't there a verse about?
You're smart.
Where was 16, 18? Appoint judges and officers within all your gates, which Jehovah your Elohim is giving you, according to your tribes. So every tribal area had to have their own judges then, which means the Levites didn't, because they don't have a tribal area.
Yeah.
Right.
And they weren't. Well, they did have the tabernacle. The tabernacle was at Shiloh.
But they would have a high priest that would make the rulings for them, about ritualistic, cultic issues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't he also do it for all of Israel?
So he was also the head of the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin then, so there were at times either 23 or 71 leaders of the Sanhedrin. So if a case got brought that high, he would be sitting in on that case also.
So
I don't know how many cases ever made it that high.
so when we read in the book of Judges about certain judges, it seems to me like there were different tribes. They were just people that stood out, or they didn't judge all of Israel,
Tribal
Samson.
areas. That's my understanding. Yeah. Now, how do we get our judges today? And appointment, right? So at the lower level, we elect judges within states, but at the we do all the way up to state. But at the federal level, those judges are then appointed by the president, right? Same principle being done here, appointed by people. Okay.
Are right rulings always from?
So you have commandments, and then right rulings come from those.
Okay.
So an example, if you we're in Deuteronomy 17, Brian. We have two commandments that are pitted against each other. So on Sabbath, you are to do no work. On the 8th day, you are supposed to circumcise your child. So if the 8th day happens to be a Sabbath, do you circumcise them? So you have two commandments that are competing. This happens in our legal system also. We have a federal law that says you can't smoke pot, and we have a state law that says you can. So now they're in conflict with each other, right? Okay. So, so a right ruling is when a judge comes along, or Sanhedrin, or Yeshua, and he says, if in this case you have the 8th day falling on Shabbat, Yeshua says you do what?
Circumcised.
You circumcise. Okay, so he's actually making a right ruling based on those two laws in Torah. That make sense?
Yeah, so it's from scripture. It's just kind of how you apply.
It's an application of Torah, correct? And that stands then as case law for everything else. Okay. Well, on the same page? We're all good so far up in the story here?
I'm on
Okay.
413.
Okay. I'm only on 305. Oh, JPS. So you shall come to the Levitical priest and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. So the judge is making that appellate decision, okay, because it was too baffling for the other person. For us in the American system, we would have, local courts, state courts, appellate courts, and then the Supreme Court, right? The Supreme Court for us would be the equivalent of their Sanhedrin. Okay, that's their highest court in the land.
They didn't do juries, right?
No. And the reason that there's this appeal going on is that it was too hard for that judge to decide. Not because the litigants are upset and they didn't like the outcome.
Important distinction.
It's a huge distinction, yeah. So, which is what happens today. So, because there was a technicality that happened, the officer, forgot 2 words in reading the Miranda rights. This person now gets off, and then justice doesn't occur because of this little technicality. Okay, so that happens all the time today. And so, I'm sitting down in the federal courthouse, for 3 weeks listening to all this to go on, and the lawyers are going point by point, methodically, making sure they get, they have to prove is this actually a Facebook account? How do we know? It's so irritating, but I understand why they're doing it. But it's just this is why court cases take so long, because it's just stupidity. Because there's going to be some little issue that someone will find a problem with. When I talked with the judge afterwards, he said, for example, we went through this thing with, there were some side issues about pornography, okay? And there were a whole bunch of other pictures, but we didn't get to see them. He only picked a couple for us to see. Now, that decision's based on that's his decision, right? And he had to pick the correct number of pictures and that were showing, what we needed to see for them to make their point, okay? And that would be the issue. So when it goes to an appellate court, that would be the thing that gets turned over because he didn't pick enough. It's not because we chose wrong. It's not because we made a bad decision or something like that. It has nothing to do with righteousness. It simply has to do with the technicality of how many did he admit and were they of the right thing. Okay. So our court system, because of how it's developed differently, it was based on this, but it has developed over time, evolved over time in something differently. We get caught up in all this minutia, and quite often righteousness and justice don't get served then. Okay.
At all.
Sometimes at all, yeah. So when we read about the court system here in the text, it's important we don't read our court system into the text. That would be eisegesis then. We're reading our culture and times into the text. Big no-no. Our court system is different than their court system, right?
And where our court system separates religious rule from secular rule, theirs, it sounds like they're working side by side.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, so in their case, when the judge says, "Just shut up, you're an idiot," you shut up because you're an idiot. In our case, we throw it out, and all of a sudden there's mistrial. That type of thing. So this judge has a huge amount of power. Okay.
But they're also basing everything on Torah. Their
Mhm.
judgments, even if it's unclear, how do we do this? They're still going to base it on Torah, not on.
In theory, not on their own whims,
Yeah.
right? Or ideology or whatever. Yeah. So the scenario would be that you're in a court case, you present your evidence, they present their evidence, and the court says, "Wow, this is a case we've never seen before. I don't know what to do with it." So then he kicks it up to the next level. Okay. Can you think of a case in Torah as an example of that where that happened? It's a very, very famous case. Nope.
The baby.
Probably involving Solomon.
Yeah. With the
Well,
baby
but
and-
in that case, Solomon was the top, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they brought it to, okay, hadn't thought of that one. That's a good one. There's also the daughters of Zelophehad. Okay, there had never been a case law of a woman receiving property before. So Moses didn't know what to do. And he's the guy in charge. He is the top judge, right? So what does Moshe do? He goes to the Father, who is the ultimate judge, right? So he brought, what was the reason he brought it to him? It was too baffling for him to understand how to deal with it.
Like
Okay.
culture didn't allow him to make the ruling that God needed.
Correct. Okay, so that's the judge bringing it to a higher authority. It wasn't the women going, "We protest. we're going to go to the tabernacle and talk to God about this." Blah blah blah. Okay, it was the judge who had to humble himself and say, "I have no clue how to decide this case. I don't know what to decide it upon." Okay. So when we get to Second Temple times, there was then a court established over all of Israel, and that court was called Sanhedrin. And Sanhedrin, the root word means to sit together. Okay, so they all sat in a room together, and then we call that a council or a court. So that council then makes right rulings using Torah law, okay, to make their decisions by, in theory, okay. So do you guys know where the Sanhedrin met?
When it was in Jerusalem in the temple.
In the temple, okay. It's called the Lishkat Hagazit. Lishkat Hagazit. There's a name for it, okay. It's the chamber or hall of hewn stone. Good. So I'm going to try something here real quick before I show you guys the picture. I'm supposed to be able to screen share on this. Share screen. So I should be sharing screen with everybody online right now. This is a picture of the Hall of Hewn Stone that the Sanhedrin met in. So, and I'll show it to you guys in just a second. So this is imagine, I don't know what you call it, like a square room, but it has a arc, half of a sphere. No, that's not. Arch, thank you, at one end. So it's rounded at one end, okay?
Like a Roman Colosseum.
Kind of like a Colosseum or an amphitheater type thing, yeah, okay? So they would have 30 people sitting on one side, 35 on one side, 35 on the other, and then the high priest sits in the front, okay? Then there were tables that were in the middle of that, and those were where the scribes would sit. what would we call those today in our courtroom? Stenographers, and we'd have a court reporter there, and then we have, because you have two sides that are offering evidence, we would have the prosecution and the defense. Right. Yeah. So let me take this off screen share for a second now. Hopefully you guys all saw that, so I can show it to everybody here. There we go. And expand. Okay. Hey, I can make that big. So that's what the courtroom looked like. Okay. That's again, that's not like a real picture that's put together based on archaeology. Right? So down in the corner here is this small picture. Let me see if I can bring that up for you guys.
So how did they allege to know this shape?
From records like Josephus and archaeology. We actually know exactly where this was at. So this is the.
Do you know exactly where it is on the Temple Mount?
They know where it's at. Well, there's arguments about where on the Temple Mount this exactly is, right? There are like 3 different positions basically about that.
Plus,
yeah. So, but so once you have the layout of the temple, we know where it was inside the temple. Okay. So here's the layout of the temple. We have this is the Holy of Holies and the holy place at the top there. Okay. This is the outer court here, the women's court. There were 4 rooms to that. So that orange spot right there was the Hall of Hewn Stone. Okay. Kind of a side gallery, but it was technically inside the temple court. So this is so it's, yeah, outside. Well, it'd be kitty corner across from the brazen altar there. Okay. But inside that courtyard, the priestly courtyard. Okay. There are some records I was reading that say that it also went a little bit into the women's courtyard, the outer courtyard. And I'm guessing that had to do with different entrances. So part of it was holy, part of it was kind of unholy, if you will, different levels of holiness type thing. Okay, give me a second here because I heard a ding. Let's see what that is. Yep, we're gonna pause for just a second. Let me take this message. It's my brother. So she's still in the hospital. She is out of the ER and in a room. All right, I'll talk to her later. Okay, so back to our notes. So I don't think I've had a chance to mention this to all of you guys. So I want to catch you up on kind of a new trail of study I've been playing with. So we now have, we've had for 17 years the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, the Shem Tov version of Matthew. This is what Nehemiah has been doing work on for 17 years. And we have Matthew in Hebrew, okay? And we know that there are differences, and having that has helped us solve critical questions within the New Testament. Okay?
Does that come with the assumption that it was originally written in Hebrew?
Absolutely. So let me add to that, restate it a different way. We now know that Greek primacy of the New Testament has been blown out of the water. Okay, so for 17 years, we've had Hebrew Matthew. And when we got Hebrew Matthew, we discovered there are all sorts of word puns within the Hebrew text. Word puns only go one direction from language to language. Okay, so dead as a doornail doesn't work in Spanish. Okay, they just Like, why would you say that? It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Okay.
Like bueno por nada doesn't work either.
It's just it's it's possible occasionally you'll get one that makes sense, but as a general rule, it just doesn't work. So when in the Gospels, when he says your name will be Peter the Rock, well, Petra means rock. Okay, so there's a word pun there, and it works, but it's the only one that works. Okay, there are dozens of others that don't work. So we know that it was thought in Hebrew, we know that it was written in Hebrew, and it was translated into Koine Greek. Okay, we also know that the Hebrew. So when you write and read Hebrew, if Rich were to just take any text in Scripture here in Hebrew and just start reading through it, in a literal translation, it would say, and this, blah, 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 and that, blah, 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 blah. Because like almost every sentence starts with the letter Vav. It's and. So when you get an honest literal translation of the New Testament, you'll see and all over the place. That is terrible Koine Greek. It's terrible classical Greek. It's amazing Hebrew. Okay, so we've had all these things pointing us in this direction. Okay, so now this new guy pops up on the scene. He's actually been behind the scenes for the last 17 years, working his heart off, and his name is Miles Jones. Okay, he is an educator. He worked for the State Department for years in Yemen. He's a linguist, has a PhD in linguistics and stuff. And he has been one of the people that they've called on to translate a bunch of archaeological finds. Okay, so for example, we have this thing called the Moses stone, Moshe stone, or some people call it the Yahweh stone, or rightfully now Yehovah stone. It was there was this South Korean doctor who was working for the Saudi royal family, and he finds this in a museum there, and he goes, "Oh, that's just the coolest thing ever." And he kind of recognizes that this is Hebrew and stuff like that. And so he was talking with the royal prince, and he's like, "Hey, I want to do something to bless you. You've been such a great doctor for the family. Is there anything in my kingdom I can do for you?" And he goes, "Yeah, you have this little relic over here in this museum. Can I have it?" And the prince goes, "Sure, just go tell him, give him this. Here's my signature, and they'll give it to you." He takes it. It says Yod He Vav He on it in Paleo Hebrew. Okay, this is now the oldest relic artifact that we have on the planet. Previous to this, it was the Silver Scrolls, which were like 700 BC. This now moves to Moses's time, 1400 BC. Okay, so this guy, Miles Jones, is the guy that gets called to translate the script. Okay. He spends several years in Egypt doing all this translation work and stuff like this, finding each of these letters in the old text and stuff in other places in Egypt to make his case. And so fabulous discovery within the last few years, right? So in the midst of that, he then, with all this other work, he then finds, 1 second, see what that is.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of early church historians that also said it was written in Hebrew and then translated into Greek. So I just kind of support it. I have a list of them.
Eusebius, Papias,
Irenaeus.
They all say it, but we just didn't have it.
Of
So
Alexandria.
Because it's sitting
Jerome.
in the basement of the
Well,
Vatican.
so 17 years ago, Nehemiah is looking around inside the Vatican, and what would happen over the centuries is people go in, they look at these manuscripts, and they're going, "Oh, this is really interesting," and a page falls out, and they don't know where it goes. So they take the page and they stick it over here in this pile. So Nehemiah calls this the junk box. Okay, so he's looking through their junk box, and he finds pages from Mark, Luke, and John in Hebrew. He has said nothing about this for like 17 years. Okay, he just put it on hold. And
Nehemiah did.
yeah. And they just focused on Matthew because they had the whole Matthew, and that was enough work, and it's kept him very busy. and then he moved into working on the name of God, and we're over 1,000 manuscripts on that, and 13 ancient rabbis, and all this stuff. So Miles Jones, he ends up finding Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in a language called Catalan. Catalan is a Spanish language. So all of the Messianics in Europe ran to Spain, okay? And they wrote in this very specific style and very specific during this time period called Catalan, okay? He has all 4 complete Gospels, okay? And he's now unpacking these, okay? So we're finding quite some interesting differences between and again, we know it goes one direction, okay, from this. So for example, the verse that Yeshua says, we also have, I should mention, British Museum, we have sections of the book of Revelation. I have copies on here of James and Jude in complete Hebrew. So we're coming pretty close to establishing a whole New Testament in Hebrew. There has basically never been a more exciting time to be a believer than today, other than maybe Yeshua okay, and Moses, because of what is actually going to be coming out over the next 5-10 years from all of this research. So when Yeshua says, I have the keys to death and the grave, you guys are familiar with that verse, right? Okay. So the word for keys there in the Hebrew text isn't key, it's nails. So he has the nails of death in the grave. So, well, it's kind of interesting. He did have a portion of his life that dealt with some nails and stuff like that, but how do you make the connection? Well, lo and behold, we actually have, archaeologically, we have old ankle bones that had crucifix nails pounded through them, and we have the nail and the bone stuck together, okay, that we have found. And so when they would crucify someone and nail that through their bone, and it sometimes went actually through the bone, they would then go around to the other side, take their hammer, and whack that nail and bend it down. Like someone's gonna maybe wiggle their leg off the cross, right? Type thing. So we're gonna make sure you don't get off there, and we're gonna bend it down. We have archaeological evidence of this, okay? So those nails that were bent like that, they would use them as skeleton keys in locks. Oop, oop. And it acted as a key. So is key the wrong translation? No. But nails is actually the correct word, but they were using the nails as keys. Make sense? Now, that one's not necessarily, it's not going to change any of my doctrine or anything like that. It just explodes the whole verse into something that makes more sense, okay? Because Yeshua literally had the nails. He wore those nails, okay? So, let me go back to this. And expand that. So, we have external texts to the Bible about this next topic I get to share. So in the Gospels, we understand that when Yeshua is on the cross and he dies, what is the immediate effect on the earth? There's darkness and there's an earthquake, okay? Now, what happens to buildings when earthquakes happen? They fall apart, okay? Does cloth normally fall apart in an earthquake? No. Okay, so I've grown up hearing that there's this giant veil there. It's 80 feet tall, a handbreadth thick, 30 feet wide or something like this. And there's an earthquake and the giant piece of cloth rips in two. So
yeah, it did, but the lentil.
There's more to it, yeah. So what happens is the earthquake hits, okay, and literally the stones of the temple break in half, including the lintel that holds the two doors behind the curtain, that lintel breaks in half and the curtain falls. Okay? Now, could the curtain have gotten ripped in the process? Yeah, it's absolutely possible. Okay? But from a Hebraic perspective and a Greek perspective, here's the big difference. The Gentiles need that curtain to be gone. Okay? Because as soon as that curtain's gone, they can get in and they have access. That's been the whole teaching that I received in the church for 17 years. Okay? So I was literally prophesied over how I was going to be this throne room intercessor, that I was going to go right before the face of God. I'm sorry. No one goes before the face of God. No one goes into the Holy of Holies, John chapter 3. No man goes into heaven except Yeshua. Okay? That's the Holy of Holies. I have access to the holy place because he makes us a royal priesthood. His plan was to always have a royal priesthood. Okay? So the Gentiles need the curtain to be rent. Okay? That gives them access in here. What God did is he rent the temple in half, thereby defiling the temple. That temple is now no longer to be used. It is of no value. Why? Because he now takes the temple and puts it inside of us, and we carry his spirit to the utter ends of the earth. Make sense? Okay? Now, you go to Hebrews chapter 10. Let's deal with this. Oh, look at all this has new things in the back. Who knew? Hebrews 10. So again, sometimes we read things into verses here, okay? So Hebrews chapter 10 says, let me find it, starting in 18. Now where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer a slaughter offering for sin. So brothers, having boldness to enter into the set-apart place by the blood of Yeshua. So what's the set-apart place? That's the holy, that's the outer one, right? Not the inner one, okay? By the blood of Yeshua, by a new and living way, which he instituted for us through the veil that is his flesh. So his flesh represents the veil. Does that mean the veil's gone? Does that mean the veil's ripped? It doesn't say that in the text, okay? It's equating Yeshua's flesh with the veil. So in other words, if you want to get in there, you got to go through him, okay? All right. So when we look at the Hebrew texts, it does not say that the veil was rent. The Hebrew texts say that the stones were rent, that lintel piece was broke in two, okay? Now it's interesting, maybe we'll get into this. So I think I copied this. So let me read a little thing. This is from a book called Secrets of Golgotha. So it says, something, however, caused the Sanhedrin to be banished, as the Talmud tells us, from the chamber of hewn stones to the trading place. This happened in AD 30. We are not told in what day or month that this banishment took place. Whatever the case, when Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was brought before the Sanhedrin for trial, we find that they were still meeting in a building that was still part of the temple. The book of Acts tells us that Stephen was led into the Sanhedrin, Acts 6:12. So if I read he was led into the Sanhedrin, I would assume he went into the Hall of Hewn Stone. It's not giving me the exact specifics, right? Got to know context. While there, false witnesses were brought in who said, this man does not stop speaking against this holy place and against the law. For example, we have heard him say that Yeshua the Nazarene will throw down this place and change the customs that Moshe handed down for us, Acts 16, 13, and 14. Clearly, these statements show that the accusers of Stephen, who were then within the official chambers of the Sanhedrin, were still located in this holy place. the temple complex, right? They did not say simply the temple, as one would expect if they were then situated somewhere away from the temple. The truth is they were still meeting with the temple complex when Stephen was tried before the Sanhedrin. What we now need to ask is, what would have caused the Sanhedrin to abandon the official and quite palatial chamber of hewn stones very near the holy place itself to meet in an insignificant area on the Temple Mount called the Trading Place? The Talmud relates it was because of a banishment. But who would have banished them from their normal place for meeting in AD 30? There would have been no reason for the Romans to have demanded such a move because they cared little for what the Jews did in a religious sense, as long as they remained obedient to Rome and paid their taxes. It could hardly have been the Roman government that made them transfer their Sanhedrin a few yards east of the Chamber of Hewn Stones. So the Talmud records 40 years before the destruction of the temple, it'd be AD 30. It's like there's facts, right? The Sanhedrin was banished from the Chamber of Hewn Stone and sat in the Trade Hall, Shabbat 15a. The Trade Hall was an area on the Temple Mount where shopping took place and was apparently the only site available when they had to move. At that time, they were then forced to meet in a far less holy location on the southern fringe of the Temple Mount, where a 900-foot long open-air basilica served as part of a shopping mall. Then they were relocated a second time to a place in Jerusalem outside the temple area altogether. After the destruction of the temple in AD 70, the Romans allowed the Sanhedrin to continue meeting in the town of Yavne near the Mediterranean coast. Yavne. I think that's Haifa today, if I remember correctly. It moved 7 more times with its final location at Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, where it remained until it was dissolved in 425 AD. The Hall of Hewn Stone, when the holy place cracked in half, the Hall of Hewn Stone also was cracked in half, and it was unsafe for them to meet in there. That's why they were banished.
And the door.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things in the Talmud about the doors creaking and opening by themselves, and this rabbi goes out and he prays against the doors creaking and stuff like this. They were all getting freaked out over this. So not only is he saying the temple is no longer, this physical temple here, is no longer the temple I'm going to put my presence in. He's saying this authority system is also no longer going to be my authority system. Okay?
You have to wonder how many of those people put 2 and 2 together.
I'm thinking Joseph of Arimathea did.
Yeah.
Nicodemus did. Not all of them.
Well, the truth is, though, that James said to Paul, look at all the thousands of Galileans. It wasn't, and he said Galileans. So people that were there in that area, directly around Jerusalem, have become, I think it's a tens
I don't remember.
thousands or tens of thousands. So it was a fairly significant percentage. I also heard someplace.
So. I would think so. I mean, it's all of this was not done in a vacuum. It was very public, all of it. And
which goes back is that whole shame and honor thing that.
Right.
Well, and here's Yeshua on the cross dying, and there's an earthquake, and there's darkness, and there's all this stuff going on. There's people coming out of their graves. Something's going on here, people.
These are highly noticeable things.
Yes.
Right. It wasn't. Yeah. It was hard to. They really had to work hard to hide it as much as they could. But it was. I was listening to Tom, as I do a lot with Wyman regularity. But he was talking about the problem was the expectations, because the Jewish, because they were all really into Daniel and the end times and the latter days. And actually, Tom makes the point that there is actually 2 latter days. Jesus came in the first latter days because it was latter to them. It's not latter to us, but it was latter to them. And the prophecies often are duplicate prophecies. Things that happened then will happen again. But it was the latter days. But the reason they had all these theories about how the Messiah was going to come, they were flat wrong about what it meant. And they ignored things like Isaiah 53 and brought all the other ones that were talking about the returning king and all that stuff. And so they made this theology. And so when Jesus actually came, they just couldn't see it. They just couldn't see it.
Mhm.
It was completely invisible to them.
As no different today is that we have tons of people in the church who there is this giant Hebrew awakening going on all over the planet,
And they're going,
and they just can't even see it. Right?
As a matter of fact, they refuse to even consider it. It's kind of interesting.
There was a friend of mine. He was telling me about meeting with some friends from they were kind of church guys type thing, and he says they were talking about what was the topic? Tithing. So they were at a casino. And so the question was like, well, do we tithe on this, or how what percent, or on the winnings, or how do we do this? And so this friend of mine, I said, so do you actually want to know what the Bible says about the Hebrew perspective on this? And they all said no. No, we don't even want to know. Don't even go there with us, right? So it's not like they're even interested in it. I mean, it's like they're actively working against it. Yeah, it's crazy.
And yet still God still speaks to them and works through their lives.
Like
it's absolutely crazy.
I have this verse in the Old Testament that I could share with you guys about that. Do you want to hear it? No, I don't want to hear it.
If you don't want to hear what the Bible says about it, then why do they even care about tithing?
Just crazy.
I mean, that makes no sense.
Just crazy.
I can respond.
Yeah,
Couldn't figure out how to type.
I mean, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Why
Okay.
be concerned?
So that was my giant rabbi trail there. Okay. If you're gonna do a rabbi trail, you got to do it right. So, okay. So let's go back to Deuteronomy here, and see if we can't use this to springboard to another rabbi trail. So I think we are up to verse 10. We've made it 3 verses, so we're doing pretty good. Verse 10, then you shall do according to what they declare to you from that place that Jehovah will choose. So what's the place Jehovah will choose? Jerusalem, okay. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you. Who's the they? The judges and priests that have made this new decision, right? Okay. So they make the decision. You have to go enforce that decision, right? On the lower court.
And this is not, he's prophesying or he's telling them a whole lot of time, because weren't the judges around about 400 years before they even moved?
We're going to talk about that, yeah. So the rabbinic commentary goes into a huge discussion about this that deals exactly with that point. So what do we call the thing today when a court declares something? A judgment, Shophtim, or a verdict. They render a verdict. The judge gives the verdict, right? Okay. So he goes on, he says, and you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you.
To the tenor of the sentence which they shall show you.
So maybe are you suggesting that we should obey the spirit of the law as well as the law?
The tenor of the sentence.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing in my translation, it says, you shall be careful to observe according to all they teach you.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
So teachers give directions. That's the connection there, teach and direct.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So verse 11, according to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they declare to you, either to the right hand or to the left.
No appeals.
Now, there's no more appeals court, is there? Okay. The decision has now been rendered, and you don't get to reinterpret what they've said. Okay. That part's
tenor,
done.
That's interesting. The tenor of something is precisely. That's how I feel that, hear that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not kind of, this is what it is. This is, you're done.
So you use the word musically. Is an alto a tenor?
No.
Is bass a tenor? It's very specific, isn't it?
Very specific.
There's a certain range, and you stay within that range now, right? Okay.
It's a limiting word.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the Sanhedrin can change its mind, but you can't disobey what the Sanhedrin says. So if another court comes along and changes a previous ruling, that's on them, right? But the average Reuben, the average Israelite, has to obey whatever the Sanhedrin says, okay? You can feel a certain way about a topic. You can think a certain way about a topic. You cannot act any other way than what they say, right? So I may not like the ruling they gave, but that is your feeling, that is your thought, and I could care less about those.
Feel free.
Feel free to feel that way, okay? It doesn't change the behavior that's expected, okay? Because everything back then was behavior oriented.
Did they have jails back then?
Mm-hmm. Even Joseph and Potiphar, they had a dungeon. They probably weren't very nice places. They're not going to give you three squares on a cot, pink suits and TV.
No, they probably.
I mean, we have, pretty amazing jails here in the United States. In Morocco, when I was in Morocco, we drove past a jail, and the only way you got meals in Morocco is if your family brought them to you.
Really?
And if you didn't have a family, then you didn't get meals. I mean, the rest of the world's judicial system is very different than ours.
I saw
But you have the same thing in Europe as you have in the United States, and maybe in spades,
Mm-hmm.
because
we saw a video of a jail in Germany.
I think it was.
It was like a 5-star hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and I am not kidding.
Yeah.
I thought, well, most people in the United States pay money to sleep in that thing. It was amazing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we have inmates today that would just as well stay there.
Yeah, sure. Better than anything they've got outside.
Yeah.
That gets into a whole different subject area.
Yeah.
As to the reasons why.
All right, verse 12. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before Jehovah your God, or to judge that man, shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear, and not act presumptuously again.
It means if you have the death penalty.
Contemptuously.
Say that again?
Mine says contemptuously.
Contemptuously?
And doing so, you're dishonoring the judge.
Okay.
You see, and that's the real crux of the problem. You can't dishonor the office.
So we use today in courts, if someone doesn't do what the judge says, then we call that contempt of court. So they're acting contemptuously, okay?
This one also says the man who does presumptuously, and all the people shall hear and fear, and do no more presumptuously, on verse 13. So it's not what you think, it's what you do.
It's always
You have to
behavior.
act.
It's
You have to
always
act
behavior.
presumptuously. Yeah.
Again, well, it's not a rabbit trail I'm going to do. So I assume that word in that verse is asa.
Which one?
12 and 13. The man who acts presumptuously or does presumptuously is asa.
Yep.
So to do or to make. So it's a literal physical action that's taking place. So if someone acts presumptuously or contemptuously, what is the offense?
Eliminate your gene pool.
Okay,
You're done.
we now have a capital offense, right? And that also means you're going to have another trial. So it's not like the judge could just like pull out a sword and go, you're done. Okay, there would be another trial to prove that he was acting in this way. Okay, but if you do act this way, you must understand that it is a capital offense.
I wouldn't like that here.
That probably wouldn't go over well today. Okay,
It would be great.
so you know, the scenario is I'm not going to pay the 5 shekel fine that you said I owed. So now we have a new trial and we're going to put you to death. Would have been better to pay the 5 shekels. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have to be happy about paying the 5 shekels? Absolutely not. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can stand there and yip and holler and say the court's wrong. This is a puppet court. You know, yippity yippity yap. You know, whatever words you want to stick in there. I hate, you know, this judge or whatever. Doesn't matter. Point is, pay the 5 shekels. Okay.
I
Now-
don't know if I'd be even saying anything against the judge. I think I would just keep my mouth shut and not say
Yeah.
anything. You can think what you think, and you might not get dealt with quite so severely.
Mm-hmm. So the judge sends the sheriff to your house. He gets the 5 shekels out of your chest of drawers and pays the restitution. And you can be standing there fuming, you know, steam coming out from under your collar and stuff like that. You're still going to pay, right?
It's the action that matters, not the treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
you
that,
pay one way or another. You
in
pay
that
with
culture,
money.
the Levites and the high priest and the judges had so much more authority and respect
Mm-hmm.
from the people than people today don't even don't necessarily have to respect a judge.
Right.
Oftentimes they don't, because the judges they're just men, you know, they're just people. They are subject to the same stupid thoughts and actions that.
And some of the judgments that are meted out by are horrible.
Well,
They
and
let people
so
walk.
today
That's no different than this, though.
we use over the last 30, 50 years, judges have become ideologues. So they are making judgments based on their own ideology instead of facts on the ground. So you know, our own, as law is written. So our own Ninth Circuit is known as the circus court. But like 90% of their appeals get turned over. So if you had a 90% fail rate at your job, you'd get fired. You know, these guys though, they have tenure, and so you know nothing happens to them. So what is the Torah afraid of happening here? Why does he have to tell us this?
So that people will hear and be afraid and not do that stupid thing again.
Okay, and what would that cause if more and more of them did it?
The system we have now.
Okay.
Bring us up to date.
Yeah, so chaos, right? Lack of order. Absolutely. So it's a fundamental challenge to the authority of the law itself, okay, to act that way. It creates the seeds of anarchy, right? And eventually, then that nation will tear itself apart. That's the end result of that.
There is no escape.
All right, that takes us, I think, to verse 14. It says, when you come to the land that Jehovah your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom Jehovah your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. We are commanded to, so are we commanded to have a king?
No, you're not.
Okay. The first word, Rich, in 1714 in Hebrew would be what?
Key.
Ki, which would be a,
Key tavo.
okay, ki tavo. So ki is a preposition, and it would normally be translated
For if. Well, sometimes if.
sometimes
Or
if,
because.
like,
Like.
sometimes, okay? So it is the traditional word used for if, okay? I'm sorry, no. It is not the traditional word used for if. Sorry, is if, okay? So, so this isn't if you come into the land,
This is
it's
when you do.
when you come into the land, okay? So this is a future thing, okay? So it's saying that this is an inevitable thing that's going to happen in your future. They're not at this point yet. It's going to take about 400 years for them to get to this point, okay? But there's coming this inevitable thing where they get to a position as a culture, as a nation, where they're going to say this, okay? So is Yah pro-monarchy or anti-monarchy?
No.
It's neither. Okay.
Not either.
Okay. What he's saying is, if you have a monarchy, when you have a monarchy, then there are stipulations that are going to go with that. Okay. What are some of the stipulations?
King has to write out the Torah and read it every day.
King's going to have to write and read it. Okay. What else?
He has to be a brother.
Can't be a foreigner. Okay. Has to be a native born. Okay. Our Constitution says the same thing. Why would we do that?
So there's no mixed loyalties.
To prevent mixed loyalties. Okay. What's the next? Look at the next verse, 16. What are some more stipulations there?
No horses.
Not,
Well, we
Not-
won't have too many.
Too many horses. Okay.
they can't have too many women either.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I wonder
Too
if
many, though.
Exactly my point. Yes.
Why
Thank you.
didn't he put a number on
Why
that?
not put a number there, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
One horse.
Like one seems plenty to me, but okay.
I wonder
I he's playing to somebody else.
my daughter can't have enough. Anyway, I wonder if
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were
Good
talking about
correction.
okay then. I wonder if Egypt was the center of horsemanship because it says, lest you return to Egypt to get horses.
So yeah, so
Specifically,
it was the Hyksos that brought the horses from the Canaan area to Egypt.
Oh.
So we know, and they also brought I don't know if whether it was just the bow or I guess what we would call a compound bow today.
Reaper.
Yeah, so they brought archery to Egypt also. And he can't have excessive silver and gold, right?
What happened to Solomon?
He kind of broke all of the, well, so he was like one of the greatest kings ever, so apparently whatever he had didn't reach this number. Or maybe it,
1,000
maybe
women.
it did.
All of their kings had problems.
Yeah.
No matter who they were.
Maybe they weren't all wives.
Even David.
How much success? Yeah, we did.
Way-
Yeah, excessive to one person is not excessive to another, right? Again, it leaves all this room for interpretation then. right?
Well, and also, Solomon's problems were caused by his multiple wives.
Correct.
Specifically, it's called out. This is the problem.
Yep.
He had too many wives. He's trying to please too many women, and it caused him to sin.
And those women all had other loyalties to, because primarily the reason he married everybody he did was to create treaties and alliances with these other nations and stuff to bring peace, right? Where his dad, he solved the monarchy issues through killing everybody. Just go out and kill all the Philistines. Boom, now there's no problem, right? Solomon tried to do it through alliances and diplomacy. Okay, so where did I leave off here?
Well, it also says he loved his wives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a negative. And that's a negative comment at one level in the commentary about that. He loved his wives more than he loved God.
That's what it's attempting to say.
Yeah, that's what he's trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. And that's a good thing.
So why does sometimes God will say, for example, he says, observe the Sabbath. It's really straightforward, right? But in this case, there's all this nebulous stuff. Why does God give all this very clear direction in some places and then very nebulous commandments in other places, right? It's not specific, right? So what's excessive then? We have all these questions start arising, right?
Is it an attitude check?
Well, so what does he know we're going to do?
Bend the rules.
Excess.
Yeah, we're going to try to figure out where the line is, right? Like, do children not do this? They want to know where the line is, right? Do not the ants try to figure this out when you put oil down? They want to know right where the line's at. They want to know if they can cross it or not, okay? So human behavior is no different, right? We're going to try to figure out just how close I can get to that fence without shocking myself, right? There's some video I saw this last week. There's this kid. He's up on a stool with tennis shoes on, and he's holding an electric fence. And so then another kid comes up and he puts a stool there, stands up on it, and grabs that kid. And there's like 5 or 6 of them in a row, and they're all holding each other's hands and stuff, and they're all like really cautious about it. And they're like they check and then they grab the person's hand. Last kid comes up and he doesn't put a stool there, takes off his shoes and grabs the hand. And they all go, "Wah!" And they're all running around because they just got shocked, right? We're going to test these things. We want to know how this works, right? We're no different. Okay. So is this then, is the idea of a king, is it Yah's recommendation or is it his accommodation for us?
Accommodation.
Okay. Now, once this happens, not everyone is going to agree with the interpretation. So keep in mind, when Saul becomes king, right? How did Saul become king? Shmuel anointed him king. Did everybody agree with that interpretation?
Don't know. There's no
Not
word.
immediately.
Really? Okay. How about David when David became king? Yeah, like were his brothers happy about this? Okay. So not everybody, so prophet comes along and says the word of God. People question the word of God, right? Okay, we talked about that already. Talked about that. All right, so let's go to scoot a little forward and see if we can put some context on this a little bit more, an example. Go to first Shmuel Aleph. That's 1 Samuel for those in Rio Linda. Bart. Verse 1. Starting in verse 1. Oh, chapter 8, verse 1. No problema. Okay. So 1 Shmuel chapter 8, verse 1. When Shmuel became old, he made his sons judge over Israel. Oh, so now we know how we got judges. Okay. The name of his firstborn son was Yoel, and the name of his second, Abiah. And they were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways. Whose ways? Samuel's, okay. But turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. I'm sure that has never happened before or after this event, that a judge took a bribe, right? Okay. So why would Shmuel be concerned about this?
He was a man who followed the Lord, so therefore the fact that his sons were not following they weren't even trying to look like they were following God.
Mm-hmm. So now go one more step. So what's the end result of that? If they're not following God and they're the judges,
they're in trouble.
It's going to be bedlam and disorder in the kingdom, right? Okay. All right. So verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Shmuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. So who's concerned here? Okay. So who's concerned?
Well, the leaders of the non-religious leaders of the people.
Okay, so elders of Israel.
Those are the tribal leaders.
Yeah. So their solution to solve this problem is that Shmuel would appoint for them a king to judge us like all the nations. Okay. Other nations are called Gentiles. Those would be foreigners, right? This is starting to sound like Deuteronomy 17. Foreigners aren't supposed to be in charge of you, right? Okay, verse 6. But the thing displeased Shmuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Shmuel prayed to Jehovah, and Jehovah said to Shmuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you. Now, at that point in the text, it sounds like God's approving of this. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Now it sounds like he doesn't approve, okay? The tone changes there. So in other words, go ahead and do it, but in doing so, realize that they're rejecting God. The people want a human king, a flunky, a puppet, okay? And it sounds more like a concession. So if you can't, in other words, if you can't see me, Yah, as the king, I will give you a puppet that you can be impressed with down there. So someone physically that you can see, okay?
I mean, I don't understand why this was allowed to happen then if it wasn't, I mean.
So God knew it was going to happen eventually.
Yeah.
So it took 400 years. There's a point in the future that they're going, as a nation, that they're going to call out and say, we want a king now. So God was very clear he knew this was coming. He says, but if you do, when you get to that point, I'm going to put stipulations on it. Okay? Verse 8. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So Shmuel told all the words of Jehovah to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment for his chariots. For he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and your female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But Jehovah will not answer you in that day. So that is the ancient Near East laundry list of crimes of kings. This is what your kings will do to you. And did. Yeah, right? Okay. Where would we go to find a modern laundry list of the crimes of kings? You have all read this document, I'm sure. Declaration of Independence.
And here we are again.
Yeah. So the Declaration of Independence, we have the opening preamble and stuff, right? And then it is literally a laundry list of everything King James was doing wrong in their opinion, right? Slaves, money, all sorts of issues, okay? Judah had many kings that were bad. We've had many presidents that are bad. Right? Same thing. Okay? Because once you get power, you very seldom give it up.
Interesting about Saul that was anointed first. He was a choice and handsome man.
So why bring that up?
Because that's what the people want. Something visual.
Correct. So he's what a king was supposed to look like. Yeah, he's a big, tall, strong, good-looking guy, and boy, he's going to make a great king.
Yeah, mighty
right?
man of valor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's pretty tall.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't he supposed to be a head taller
Yep.
than the rest of Israel
So-
or anyone in Israel?
What did David look like?
He was not a very big person.
Average guy, red hair.
Although he was good.
Ginger.
Yeah.
He was usually ginger.
He gets he gets a statue. Yeah.
But it says so.
Yeah. It's a
He said he was
Ruddy.
ruddy. Yeah.
Oh, right.
All right, verse 19. But the people refused to obey the voice of Shemuel, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." So, little observation here. At the beginning of our text, who was asking for the king? The elders were. Okay. Now, who's asking for the king? The people. Okay. And what were the elders specifically asking the king to do?
Judge them.
To govern over them. Okay. So
Would it have happened if his sons had been righteous men?
Shmuel's?
Because they were judges.
Mm-hmm. They might have been okay for another generation then, right?
Yeah, that was my.
So even a prophet. So if you're a prophet, does that mean your kids are going to turn out right?
Not necessarily.
If you're a pastor, does it mean your kids are going to turn out right? If you're a rabbi, does that mean your kids are going to turn out right? No guarantees, right? Okay.
As a matter of fact, there's a reasonably good chance
It may turn out the other way, right? Yeah. Okay. So what do the people ask for now? So the leaders wanted someone to govern them. What are these guys asking for?
to judge us and go out before us to fight our battle.
Judge, fight, and one more.
Go before us and fight.
Okay.
Judge, go out and fight
To be,
like everybody else.
you want to be like everybody else. Okay?
But they didn't stop to think. Everybody else was pagan.
Yeah. There are definitely some assumptions that went wrong here, right? So the elders, so the position of the elders is that they were saying we need governance because the tribal system isn't working. So when they look around and they go, oh, when there is a unified monarchy, then all these tribal issues go away. Okay?
It's better than what we have.
Correct. Okay? Because the tribal thing's not working. Okay? So a king will, their view is that the king leads to better governance. Okay? The people are saying we want to become more like the other nations.
And then they got a northern and southern kingdom.
Yeah.
They couldn't all get along.
So God's position is if you want a monarchy to be more like me, I can live with that. Okay? But if you want it to be more like them, that's not going to work for me. Okay? Verse 21. And when Shmuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of Yehovah. And Yehovah said to Shmuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Shmuel then said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city. And there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorach, son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. So,
I could see him.
yeah, big, tall guy, handsome, good-looking, strapping, strong man. He's going to be our good-looking king. We'll put him on all of our coins, right?
They wouldn't sound anything less.
How much longer are you going to be? Because I have to put my casserole in the oven.
Oh, yeah, we probably another 15, 20 minutes,
That's good.
somewhere in there. Perfect timing. Okay, so the first person that I looked up here is a rabbi named Sepharno. So he opens the discussion about this text, talking about the difference between kings and judges. So remember in Deuteronomy, we were looking at judges, right? But now Samuel crosses over and it kind of starts talking about the king who judges. So it introduces this idea of kingship to the discussion. So what's the difference between kings and judges?
Judges make decisions between things. Kings just make decisions.
Okay.
They decide what's going to happen. In addition to judging between conflicting values.
Okay.
So a judge, in the sense of the judges, but the truth is the judges also led in battles and did a bunch of other stuff too. So.
But so did kings.
But so did kings. So it's a difference without much difference.
Well, the judges aren't supposed to get personal gain from their decisions, but a king is going to be acting in his own interest and the interest of his land. So it's a slightly different focus.
Okay.
And each one, if done correctly, has a different amount to gain, or something to gain as opposed to nothing.
So think long term.
Well, king, yeah, for one thing, it's a hereditary.
Kings are hereditary. Okay. So are judges hereditary?
Well, they can be, because Gideon's sons were in charge for a while after him.
We're supposed to be in the tribes.
And others of the king of the judges, it was hereditary, at least to a certain extent, but it wasn't in state of.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
Where the king is hereditary.
Correct. So Sepharno, when he reads the text, he reads this text as being a king, that it's a commandment. You will have it. You need a king. You must have a king. Okay, he reads that as a commandment.
Really?
Mhm. So the idea is that sheep need a shepherd. Sheep, they need a leader. Okay, so people need a king. That's kind of his thinking about this. So the other rabbis then push back against Sforno, and if their position would be, if this is such a slam dunk that it's a commandment, that he's commanding us to have a king, then why did we wait 400 years to have a king? Because there's this whole period of the judges where we didn't have a king. So were we in error for doing this? So that's the counter argument that pushes back. So Rambam comes along and he agrees that it's a commandment, not an option. And the reason he gives for this is that we didn't have a king during that period of the judges because we were not yet established in the land. God said that he would establish us in the land. So during that period of time, the kingdom, the kingdom was not established yet. It wasn't strong, and that's why we didn't have a king yet. So the idea, remember, he says, when a point in time comes in the future, the idea being when the kingdom is established, okay, then you will need a king to lead, okay, when you guys are established. We see this with other commandments that take place throughout the Torah. There are many commandments that were given before we entered the land that we didn't do in the wilderness, okay? Do you guys know what a parapet is? It's a little pet that's injured, helps you out with things. There's two parapets, okay? So what's a parapet?
It's an edge on a roof.
Edge on a roof, okay?
Low wall.
Okay, so if I build a house, Torah says that I must put an edge around my roof. Why?
Your neighbor doesn't trip and fall.
So neighbors won't trip and fall off, okay? So when we were living in the wilderness, we still had that commandment, but we're living in tents and we're not building parapets on top of our tents so that people might fall off, okay? Commandment didn't apply, but we still were responsible for the commandment, okay? So he's making an analogy between those two.
But Jehovah said to Samuel that they're rejecting me as their king.
Mm-hmm.
So how can they say that it's a command to have a king if it's a rejection of
Him
Jehovah?
as king, right?
Everybody has their opinions.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, see, they're struggling with the text. That's, again, my point with all these guys when I do this, it's never to say, well, he's right or the Jews are right or Judaism's got that. It's simply to pull things out of the text and challenge us to think about it in new ways, right?
Well, isn't it that Moses was a prophet and he's prophesying here? He's saying, this is what you're going to do. And in Deuteronomy 28, is it? It says, you are going to do these awful things and you are going to be scattered.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 400, 500, maybe even more years before this even happens.
Correct.
So, he's just prophesying.
It's
to me,
there's a thing in the future coming.
Yeah.
Be aware, and when it comes, here's how you deal with it, right?
Yeah.
All right, where does the power of the king come from?
Yeah.
Nope.
It's what the people allow.
The people asked for the king. When the people ask for the king, then he gives them the king. Okay? So this is a ground up. It's the consent of the people that are asking for the king. How do we get a president? It's the will of the people, the consent of the people. Okay? Same principle.
And those leaders only can do what the people allow. I mean,
People make
if
rules.
we just sit back in complacency and let him do what the leader do whatever he wants to do, so it doesn't rock our boat.
Mm-hmm.
But
some of the leaders worldwide have been horrible people, but no one rises against them because, well, maybe they have the military behind them or something.
Right.
So,
So, consent of the people. So the Constitution starts out with "we the people," right? Because we recognize that the authority is in the people to provide the governmental structure. Okay, so same thing here. The people are the ones crying out for this. Now, this can be both good and bad. Even here in our country, we've had good presidents and we've had poor presidents. Okay, so within church history, if you were to look at Catholicism, there are many doctrines within Catholicism that were led by the people. The people were clamoring for a doctrine, and then church leadership gave into what the people wanted. This is how we get the doctrine of Mariology, of the Immaculate Conception. The people clamored in the 1400s that Mary needed to be immaculate. That way Jesus could be sinless. And so they created the doctrine of Immaculate Conception because all the people wanted it. And the Pope said, "Thus saith the Lord." The people's consent gave us that doctrine.
Yep.
Okay?
It's always a bad idea.
Never seems to turn out, good in the long run. So when Yeshua comes back, right now he's acting as our high priest. Okay? When he comes back in what role? King. Okay? And he's going to come back to a group of people who will need to do what?
Follow.
Consent.
That's right.
Okay? But they will do so how? Us. How will we do it? Willingly.
We don't do it willingly.
Right?
I don't know about
Yeah, not everybody's going to do it willingly, right? Okay. Yeah. So you could kind of look at that kind of backwards there. He won't come back until he has a group of people who are willing to consent to Torah, right? Well, so why hasn't he come? Why didn't he come back in 1984 when Hal Lindsey wrote the book? Why didn't he come back in 1992 when Camping wrote his book? Why didn't he come back in the 1400 or 1100s with the Millerites or whatever? There was no group of people that were going to obey Torah. Now he's developing a giant following of people who want to obey Torah, the consent of the people, right? But now it's Torah that's written on their heart. That's what he promised. Now, this whole talk of kings is probably a little bit odd to us here in America. We went from King James to representative democracy, right? But there are actually many examples throughout world history of people going the other direction. They went from some form of representative democracy to a king. Rome. Okay, Rome, if you recall, started out as a republic, like Republicans, right? We're a republic. Okay, Rome started out as a republic, and they ended up with Caesar. Okay, so they went the other direction.
It almost always happens. That's as a country, that's where we're going right now.
Well, and there's always this contraction of an expansion, right? It goes from one to the other, back and forth over a long enough period of time. So in other words, the Republic, Rome, they had this idea that people would vote their rights away
For security.
for something, security, safety, somehow. Like, like your faces are all like stunned for a second. Think about that in America today.
Oh, yeah.
See, we would think, well, I'm not giving up my rights. People are fighting for their rights left and right. They're making up rights to fight for left and right.
Rights all the time.
But yeah, if you understand what's really going on, we're giving away our rights all the time. Okay? Because we go back to that judicial system, we had this thing called a constitution, and then ideology comes in, and we keep reinterpreting all these things and reinventing and adding new laws and so, oh wait, we weren't supposed to add anything, just like the Bible, right? Yeah, just interpret what it said. Okay? We'd all be a lot better, right?
Originalists.
But that requires people to then take responsibility. Was it Jefferson, I think it was? He talked about the idea that the reason America works is that we have a moral people, and that moral people are choosing to take responsibility for their lives. The reason it didn't work in Iraq and Kuwait when we had the wars over there is that you do not have a moral people willing to take responsibility for their actions. It was because we were a biblical-based society that taught us to take responsibility for our actions that gave us the country we got, right? But but it's gone now, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So on one side you have rights, and on the other side you have like security. You have liberty and security. So people keep giving up their liberty for security, but they're not really getting security. They're
Just getting less rights.
They're just getting less rights, and they're becoming slaves again. Okay? Same thing. Okay, so there's a command in Torah that if a man goes to battle and he falls in love with a woman, he can take her as his wife, basically against her will. But then it goes on and says that there are limitations galore with this. Okay, she has to have a mourning period. During the mourning period, certain rituals have to take place. Her offspring has to be treated just as well as everybody else in the family. So is God saying, yay, go out and do this?
No, he's providing
Definitely.
standards for things that
Yeah, I know human behavior. You guys are going to be idiots, and you're going to go do these things because this is what happens when men go to battle. You do stupid things. And he knows that by looking at all of the ancient Near East cultures going on at the time, and everybody's doing this. So it's not hard to figure this out. Okay. So if that happens, then here are a bunch of stipulations that you need to follow so that it fits within my guidelines of a Torah culture. Okay? So Yah is being completely realistic. He understands this happens. Okay? But he's also going to stick a bunch of ethical stipulations on it to make sure it doesn't get out of control. So that's kind of the analogy to the monarchy, the commandment about monarchy that he makes.
I know you're going to do this stupid thing, so here's the rules.
To rein it in some, right? I love this quote. God is smart enough to know he needs to let you prove your stupidity in order for you to become wise. He will hook you, and he will just keep giving you line. And it will just keep going, and you're thinking, everything's great. I'm having the time of my life. I didn't get caught. This is wonderful. I can get away with this stuff. La, 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 la. And what's coming?
The end of the line.
Yank! The end of the line is coming, right? But God will give you enough room to hang yourself. He will give you a ton of room to hang yourself.
Or to repent and change.
Correct. That's his hope, right? But God attempts to mitigate the damage to us by putting stipulations on it, right? Both the monarchy and the situation in war. So you're going to have to, so he recognizes because we have this Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara inside of us, that we're going to have to learn things the hard way sometimes.
How about all the time?
Maybe most oftentimes, right? Yeah. But he's going to put a safety net in place just in case. Okay? So it doesn't get too bad for you. Okay? So a monarchy provides three things. It provides unity. Okay, again, the elders were concerned about the tribal system. Okay, so if we can go to the monarchy, then we have one king, one set of rules, and we just follow those rules. So that creates more unity then. Okay, which is what happened under David and Solomon. We had a unified kingdom, right? It provides stability. Okay, and it also provides absolute power. And absolute power absolutely can corrupt also. Okay, so two things there sound really good. We get unity and stability. But with that, you must recognize this is the kind of the hidden thing there. It comes with absolute power. And so we look at the despots of the world over world history, and we discover that all of those, they had unified kingdoms, their kingdoms were stable, and they had absolute power, which created despotism and a terrible situation for their people eventually. Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, all of these people, right? Saddam Hussein, okay? They all had unity within their country, stability within their country, and absolute power, and it corrupted them.
Well,
because there's no moral side to it.
even Solomon was eventually corrupted because, and then he talks about it in Ecclesiastes. This is all worthless. What am I doing?
Yeah, the end of Ecclesiastes, last sentence is the whole point of this whole thing is just love God and obey His commandments. If you just stick with that. So after that, Solomon is the most fulfilled man that has ever lived on the planet in every area of life, right? And his conclusion at the end of doing all of the stupidity that he let himself do, he says, if I would have just stuck with the commandments and loved God, it would have worked out better. Yeah. Good lesson for all of us, right? Okay. So now you had your 7th grade civics class now. We've done a good review out of chapter 17 of Devarim. Let me just check any comments here. Looking good. Right. Any other comments or something you guys studied that you'd like to share?
There's just different things that when you read through it, just odd things. And I don't remember what some of them were.
Are you guys
like breaking a heifer's neck? How in the world do you break a cow's neck?
a really big sledgehammer?
With a bear head? No, I was just because there's something about breaking the heifer. So if you put a yoke on it and turned it, but you'd think it would just tip the cow over. I mean, you have to have something hold it. It's like putting the hitch on. You wanted something to hold the other side of the hitch still, right?
So go back to the Hebrew versions of the New Testament books.
Yeah.
Are any of those been published?
No, nothing is. James and Jude are in the British Museum, and you can get a copy online. I can get Nehemiah has translated several the papers that he found in the Vatican junk box. He has translated those, and you can see those on his website. But they're only a couple pages from each one. The Catalan versions have not been published yet. But those are the ones that we have a complete full set of. And it'll probably take several years for this to happen. I have not been able to find any downloads of the Catalan ones that are available anywhere. So I'm not sure where he got them and stuff yet. And then you'd still have to figure out the Catalan script. I've never even seen the Catalan script, Hebraic script. So it's not. It's a very specific time period script. He has released a few sections, like for example, the thing on the nails. So he did the translation on that and figured this all out. So there's I think it was the Road to Emmaus he looked at, and there were some differences in there, and he went through an explanation on that I saw. But the other one, that this is where Nehemiah got involved. So we've been working through this idea of Yehovah as being the correct vowel points for God's name. So in all of the Hebrew texts that we have now of the New Testament, every one of them uses Yehovah. So not only do we have a Tanakh reference for how to spell the name, and we have 1,000 different texts of that from antiquity, we now have New Testament references that Yehovah is the correct way to say the name. And I think like in Book of Luke, chapter 1, there's like 7 or 8 of them that show up just in that text.
I suppose the primary value is to knock the pins out of the Greek preeminence.
It has been destroyed at this point. Again, no one's talking about it. I mean, like, you're not going to have church people that bring it up or something like that. But because it's going to hurt their argument. But yeah, it really, so
I like to have references of where to find this stuff.
Okay.
So that, because if you get into a discussion with somebody, you can say, well, really,
here's the document.
Here's a documentation.
Yeah.
Or just go to this website and look here. Because the truth is that it wasn't originally written in Greek, which is what we've all been told for all this time. It was all written. And you think about that in the 4th century, when the Gentiles took over the church directly and overtly, they probably just, either with malice aforethought or just by default, said, this is where we're starting. This is the Greek, is where we're going from.
Yeah.
And we're going to not talk about all that, just like they're not wanting to talk about
Well,
it now.
again, during that period of time, we see even the early church, many of the early church fathers, because they were Greek, were moving the feasts away from the Hebraic dates. And we have historical discussions of these things and stuff. So, you see, though, like Africanus, who is in Egypt, Alexandria, he's fighting for the Hebrew dates, but everybody up on the other side of the Mediterranean is all fighting for the Greek stuff. So yeah, it has. So in World War II, when we get to the point where we make the charge on Berlin and Hitler's dead and stuff, and finally we finally come to this realization of what's really going on in the camps and stuff like this, right? And we find these camps, and we have soldiers drive up to the camps, and we open the gates. And so everybody immediately ran out to freedom, right? They didn't, okay? That's exactly where we're at with the Greek primacy thing. The whole world of Christendom has changed in the last 6 months, and none of them know it. They're all still stuck in a concentration camp. I even, the analogy is not perfect. It's just, my point is, you get the point, is that they're stuck in a way of thinking that won't allow them to walk outside the gate. They don't know they've been set free.
Changes everything that they've come to accept.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, it's the same way when these people are in these Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
It changes everything, and they've been so regimented, and they have to look just this way and act just this way.
Well, and what's funny is when you explain things to them, or you say, what about Matthew 5:17 through 19. Read what it says. Study what the words mean. That blows up the whole argument. That one verse, set of verses, completely eliminates the whole Christian point of view.
But they won't read it.
But they won't read it, and they won't listen to it, and they won't think about it.
Remember when you told Russ that he refused it? I mean, it's right in front of his face. It's something he should have said, and he wouldn't look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Russ was a pastor. Don't he?
The again, with the Torah Talk thing, we know that there are pastors watching this now.
Oh, really?
But they never say anything. But we know they're on it because their addresses, their names come up, and you go, oh, look, they're watching. But again, they're not to the point where they can talk about it. But I think I have to imagine progress is made. This is growing big enough, and it's becoming public enough, and there's enough people asking questions and things like this that.
Are you voicing these kinds of things that
Oh,
you've been discussing now on tour?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah,
You bet.
There's over
Okay.
You bet.
400 people just
Yeah.
within
I'll tell you-
hours of this thing being posted.
Yeah, and it's not like it's not getting shared everywhere, because as soon as you share it,
And you get
You get
your name's gonna be they're gonna know who you are. But yeah, so we'll have 200-300 people watch it, and within an hour or two afterwards, there's 500 views. And you're like, where'd these 200 other people come from? So, but there's never any names, and but again, we have a pretty good idea of a few of them who are constantly watching.
The other thing I just wanted to say, because this is part of my prayer thing on my 45-minute drive every morning. And it's been for a long time before I had a short drive, is I always do pray specifically for the Christian pastors that I've been associated with, that the Lord will open their eyes and help them. And it's the pastor of the church that we also go to over here, and of the church we used to go to, and other people I know that are in Christian ministry. It is really critical that we who can see are praying for those who haven't seen yet.
Mhm.
We have to think of it in those terms, because these are people that God loves and who love God and are doing everything they think they need to do to be following God. They're wrong, but God loves them, and there's a whole, God reveals to them and speaks to them and talks to them and helps them and draws them forward, and yet there's this giant blind spot. It's probably the most frustrating thing that in this part of my life that I deal with, because it's just, how can you not see this?
Right.
But I have to. But I also have to. My wife says, you have to look back. How did I not see it?
Right. Absolutely.
How did I not see it? How come it took me a year and a half to go from a glimmer to understanding?
Yeah.
Yeshua said that no one can come to me unless the Father calls.
Right.
And if the Father is not calling, it doesn't happen.
Right. But how we get the Father to call him is by prayer and supplication. Say, Lord,
Please.
these guys, I need you to talk to these guys.
And I also think prayer and intercession with these people, that comes into play.
Absolutely.
Years of prayers.
Yes, he does.
Right. So I just wanted to say that out loud, because I make a habit of that. Lord, touch my life. Help me, help my kids, help my people. Lord, help the pastors, and I name off a whole pile of them that I have on my list. And the list,
I need a lot of help, believe me.
we all. We all. And
Yeah.
so it's a serious deal.
Yeah.
And if we're not willing to do it,
It's actually that is real life.
that is the real thing.
Yeah. Good. Well, should we stand and pray?
Yes.
Yes.
If you want that list of names and quotes, share that.
Okay, I love that.
Something.
In particular, the stuff about
If you take a picture of
I'll do that. Yeah.
I can take a picture. I can take a picture and make it show up on
I have a phone and I could text it to him.
Oh, you text it. iPhone's approved.
It's not a flip phone.
Bill, would you like to pray?
Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe. Father, we come before you, thanking you that you remember your servants, that you call us, that you teach us and show us what is right and true. And you teach us and show us how to live, both with our King and our fellow man. We come before you, giving you thanks that you have remembered us and that you are teaching us, showing us, and bringing us along to where we should be. Thank you, Father. We thank you for the blessing of food that you provide so abundantly. And we thank you in the name of your Son, Yeshua, our soon coming Mashiach.
Amen.
I have that jar.
All right.
Very
Thank you, everybody, for joining us online today. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to send a link afterwards so that everybody will have a link to the YouTube when it gets posted. So hope you guys have a great day. Shabbat Shalom.
Lisa's or
That's easy.
are
Do you
have
remember
you
she brought
just
that-
now started?
Oh,